Hey everyone, welcome back to another tutorial. Today I'm going to be showing you a technique of doing line of sight. Line of sight is pretty much a technique used to check if one object can see another, and it's often used to check whether a wall is between the two objects. So if there's a wall in the way, then you won't be able to see the object behind the wall. It's often seen in like AI objects, so an AI might be looking for a player, and if the player's like behind the wall, then the AI shouldn't be able to see it, but if the player's not behind the wall, then the AI should be able to see it. So it's that kind of thing. Alright, so to start off with, I have three sprites here. So we have SPR player, that's going to be our player sprite. It's a 32 by 32 circle, two sub images, so this one's red and then the next one's green, and they've both just got happy faces on them. You'll see why there's two sub images later. And that's centered. Then there's SPR ball, it's just a black 32 by 32 circle, that's centered as well. Then there's SPR wall, which is just a black 32 by 32 square, and that is also centered. Okay, then I have a room. It's just an empty room with none of the settings changed, so it's just a blank room there. And then we have our objects. So first one is obj wall. That's just an empty object with the wall sprite, and it's going to work as our wall. And there's obj ball, and it's just another empty object with the ball sprite, and that's what we're going to have our player try and see. And then there's obj player, and this obviously isn't an empty object, and it has the player sprite. So we'll start off with the create event, because in here we start off with setting image speed to 0, which is pretty much just stopping the sprite from playing its animation. And then we have our view stats. So range equals 200, so that's our view range, so we'll be able to see 200 pixels away from our player object at any one time. I've got DIR, which stands for direction, and that's just set to 0, just as a starting value, and that's used to get the direction of the of which way the player is looking. Then we have scene equals false, so we're going to be using scene so that we can easily keep track of whether our object is seeing a ball or not. Then you have target equals -1, and target is used pretty much to get the nearest ball object, but you'll see more about that later in the step event. Okay, so next we have the draw GUI event. Okay, so draw set color, see red, so we're just setting the color to red. Then there's draw line, X, Y for our first X and Y values, and then X plus length direction X, and then range and DIR. So what this is doing is going 200 pixels away from our player object in the direction that DIR is set to, and giving us that X value. So it's our X value plus, our X value plus that 200 pixels in whatever direction, and then it's pretty much the same for the Y, except it's our Y value plus that 200 pixels in whatever direction, and that gives us our Y part of that same value. So what this is doing is it's just drawing a line for where the player will be looking. And then we have draw set color C black to reset the color. Okay, now back in the step event. Okay, so DIR equals point direction X, Y, mouse X, mouse Y. So this gets the direction from the player object's X and Y position to the mouse's X and Y position, and sets DIR to that value. So we'll be able to move our mouse around our player object, and the player will look towards the mouse. Okay, so target equals collision line X, Y for the first X and Y value of the line, then X plus length direction X, range direction, Y plus length direction Y, range direction, and that is the same for when we draw our line. So again, it's just 200 pixels in whatever direction we're looking, away from our X and Y value. and then it's the object we're checking for a collision with is obj ball. So what this is going to do is return any ball object that collides within this collision line, and then true for precise and true for not me. Okay, now if instance exists, target. So what we're doing here is we're pretty much just double checking to make sure. So we're not even double checking, we're just making sure that target is actually an instance. So if there is no collision line, then it'll set target to, I think it's -1, it might be -4 though. Anyway, it'll set target to a negative value, and there will never be an object an object will never have a negative ID value. So what we're doing here is checking to see if there is an instance whose ID value matches the one saved to target, because if there is a collision line with an instance of obj ball, then its ID value will be set to target. So here we're just making sure that there is actually an object and that the object exists. So if there is one, then we want to use another collision line to check if there's any walls between our position and that ball's position. So if not collision line x, y, target.x, target.y, obj wall, true for precise and true for not me, then scene equals true, else scene equals false. So if there is no collision line between our position and the target's position, then we can see it. If there is, then we can't see it. Then down here, if the instance doesn't exist, then we can't see it. Okay, then we have our image index changing. So it's pretty much just a frame. So we're if scene equals true, image index equals 1, which sets it to the green image index in our player sprite, and then else image index equals 0, which sets it back to the red one if scene is equal to false instead of true. Okay, so then it's just our moving code down here, so we're able to move around the room and test it a bit more. So if keyboard check VK right, x plus equals 8, if keyboard check VK left, x minus equals 8, if keyboard check VK down, y plus equals 8, and if keyboard check up, y minus equals 8. So it's just pretty much the most basic movement code you can do in GameMaker. Yeah, so this here is where we see our object. So just once again to go through that. Alright, so if there is a collision line with the ball, we get that ball's ID value. We then check to make sure that target has an ID value and it isn't a negative value, so there is a collision line. If there is, then we make sure that there's no collision line between the players x and y position and the target's x and y position. If there is no collision line, then we can see that ball object. If there is a collision line, we can't see it. And if the original collision line, so if target doesn't have an ID value, then scene equals false as well. And then just here, we simply set our image index depending on the scene variable. And that is it. So now if you are okay on that and bring up your room, if you haven't created a room, create one now. Go to objects, put your player object wherever you want it, and just put in a few walls around the place. Pretty much just do mine in a circle, and then do some balls, make sure that the balls are able to go behind the walls. That'll do, and we're ready to run. Just hit the play button and we're good to go. Okay, so as you can see, there's that red line on my screen, and that's the player objects view. I can move around with the arrow keys. So if I look at this ball, you can see my player sprite goes green. When the line comes off the ball, it goes red again, so I can see it. Now I can't. Now if I put my mouse on here and make sure I'm going to be aiming at it the whole time and move behind this wall to the left, you'll see as soon as I go behind the wall, I can no longer see the ball. So whenever there's a ball object behind a wall, that ball object won't be able to be seen because the wall is in the way. And as you can see, this works for all the other balls and the walls as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the line of sight. As I said, this is really good for AI objects, especially when you know if the play object can actually be seen or if there's a wall in the way. Hope I helped you guys out with this. Hope you understood all my explanations. I kind of had trouble explaining everything in this one, but hopefully you got it. If you have any questions, just leave a comment and I'll answer those as soon as I can. If you have tutorial requests, contact me via the Facebook page, so do a post or send a message, or use the Google Plus page. Both will be linked in the description. Yeah, as I said before, hope this guys helped. Like the video if it did too, that just lets me know. And I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.